Welcome to an expansive life conversation with results architect SANDE GOLGART. Our guest today is Marta Faria. Marta is a somatic symptom and chronic pain specialist who helps high-achieving professionals break free from burnout, fatigue, and chronic symptoms. Your journey to realignment from fear to freedom starts now. Live an expansive life.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. It is my pleasure today to be speaking with Marta. Marta, welcome to the show. I know we're all extremely excited to gain your insights here on an expansive life conversation where we talk about the idea that your best life is really on the other side of fear. But I think also for people who are experiencing pain and suffering in their body, how they get through that is certainly something that is keeping people locked into a less expansive life. So I know the audience is extremely excited. I know I am extremely excited for this conversation today. But as always, before we jump in and really start the conversation, I think it's important that we all make sure that we have arrived and that we're present. Normally, I would lead a quick 3 box breath sessions, but I would be honored if you would take that plus anything else from your somatic practice that you would like to do to make sure that we have all arrived and that we're all present and have taken time out of our busy lives to really arrive at the conversation.
So hello everyone. Sandra, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and we can start straight in with a nice practice to ground everyone. Yes?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I'll start with something simple that some people might be familiarized with or not, which is the box breathing. It's a very simple technique. So what we are going to do, we are going to inhale for 4 seconds. We're going to hold the breath for another 4 seconds. We're going to exhale in 4 seconds and hold empty for 4 seconds. So that's why it's called box, because it's 4, 4, 4, and 4. Okay, so let's do 5 rounds, and doing that, it already allows us to feel a bit more calm, a bit more relaxed. Sometimes with those somatic practices, all it takes is 5 minutes, and you can gently activate the parasympathetic nervous system and enter a state of calm. Okay, so let's go. So I will invite everyone to take a nice deep inhale for 4. Hold. Exhale. Hold empty. And inhale. Hold. Exhale. Hold. One more time. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Hold empty. 2 more times. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Hold. And one last time. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. And hold empty. And release, and just return to your normal breath. And just take a few seconds here just to notice any differences in the body, in how you feel. Good.
Right. We have arrived. Thank you so much. It's always amazing to me how much that helps. just for us to arrive and really be present, which I've found, for myself, to just be the key to life and being present and not worrying so much about the future, the past, which is where fear generally comes from. So thank you so much for that.
Welcome.
So, a nervous system specialist, a somatic healer, for those not familiar with the work that you do, could you explain more about what that is? And I know you have a really fascinating story about how you came to know this practice and used it for your own benefit. Could you share
Yeah.
the story with us?
Yeah, I can share. So, like, I've always enjoyed psychology, and I started my journey in counseling. But I remember when I was there, I was feeling, oh, like I'm enjoying, but I don't know, there is something missing. And at the time, I was still struggling with chronic conditions. I've never had anything like too serious, such as a autoimmune disease or anything, but I had IBS, interstitial cystitis, which is a bladder infection that wouldn't go away. It's often caused by bacteria, but when it becomes chronic, then it's one of those cases that doctors often don't know the explanation for it. And I also had fibroid in my womb, and I've experienced all of those symptoms for about 10 years, more than 10 years. And I was treating them separately. So you see one different specialist for each of your problem, and no one is connecting what you have, right? And I started to understand a bit more about the mind body connection. And I remember one day I was, like, this is a bit the woo, it was before the nervous system, but I was reading about the chakra system. And I remember when I was reading about the second chakra, the rules, relationships, and sexuality, I remember going, oh God, like I do have, like all those psychological issues. And coincidentally, what I have in my body is all concentrated in the pelvic area. And I don't think that this is a coincidence. So I started a healing journey. And it took me like about 5 years, but all my symptoms went away. I haven't had any symptoms in 7 years. It wasn't medication that healed me. It wasn't traditional medicine. Nothing against. We need medication. We need doctors. But overall, I feel like maintaining your health is something simple. Then I started with hypnotherapy, and I love it, and I use that within my program, within my clients. But then I felt, okay, there is the body, and that's when I started to go into the somatic studies and the nervous system studies, and it's all connected. The nervous system is linked to our minds, and it responds immediately to our thoughts, to our reactions, to our perception of the environment. So essentially what I did was to look, like how long it took me on this journey to heal. And then I thought, okay, how can I put everything together and actually create a system that is gonna help people heal, but a bit faster. Although like I don't believe in magic pill, and
Sure.
it doesn't happen overnight, but certainly you don't need to be doing therapy for years.
Right, right. And was this the time when you were living in London? Or
Yeah, it was the
okay.
time when I was living in London. I had a little break. At certain point when I left, and I was in Asia, then I was in Australia for a year, and that year was my gap year of fully studying the nervous system and somatic practices.
Okay. So I know, like, for the US, our healthcare system is really a disease care system. Um, they're not doing anything preventative. They're just basically prescribing drugs to get you to ease the symptoms, and deal with the symptoms, but really getting you hooked on the medication. And it's a for-profit, endeavor. So I'm fascinated to learn more about these types of practices. I'm a big follower of Ayurveda, trying to keep the body in balance. And when the body's in balance, you cannot incubate disease because there's no inflammation. There's no place for disease to incubate. Could you expand a little
Exactly.
bit more on how it all works? I know, most people tuning in when they hear something like this can be a little bit skeptical, but at the same time, very intrigued, because if it works and when it works, it's such a better approach to regulating our system and helping us live a much more expansive life than being, hooked on medications.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I'm not one of those holistic practitioners that is against, again, doctors and medication, because obviously, if you are seriously ill, you need
Yeah.
traditional medicine. For sure, you do. And sometimes we do need medication. I'm not against it. But what I am against is when someone says to you, okay, now you are going to have to be on this ongoing medication. Yeah, and that has side effects, and how do you deal with that? Because then the very medication you are taking is going to cause other problems. And that's when I feel that we need to lean into a holistic approach, which is incredibly simple. I say that to people: healing, it doesn't have to be complicated. Maintaining your body healthy doesn't need to be complicated. So, like, we know these days that the main cause of all diseases is inflammation, and inflammation is caused by stress. And sometimes I feel that we have a bit of a misconception about stress, because sometimes when we think about stress, we think about like the everyday life and those stressors that we have. But in reality, for example, like our unprocessed emotions is causing stress. If you have an argument with someone and you enter a state of rumination, and you are, like, that person did that to me, and blame and guilt, and like this is adding to the everyday stressors. And then you have a nervous system that's now is, very active. So you are activating your sympathetic nervous system, and that is causing inflammation, because the sympathetic nervous system is not bad. It's our survival mechanism. It's the fight or flight, and it was designed to protect us from threats. But we should be spending way more time in relaxation in the parasympathetic nervous system, that is the rest digest, as opposed to be so much time in the sympathetic nervous system. And I feel like the very, like our societies, the corporate world, the way that we work is causing us to be more in the sympathetic nervous system. Hence, we have so many diseases,
Yeah.
and so many diseases that often doctors don't understand and can't explain.
Right. Yeah. So now this is the part that I find so fascinating. One of the things that I've learned um, about stress and suffering. So it's really in how we relate to people and circumstances. It's our relationship to it. And you mentioned something just now um, about, it's how do we relate to that person or that circumstance that's causing us stress, because we think, or we can think, that life is happening to us. But the reality is that life is just happening. Generally, people aren't necessarily doing things to us, they're just being, but it's the way that we relate to what it is they're doing, our perception, and the way we internalize what is going on, that makes us think that it's happening to us. And then our parasympathetic nervous system raises up and says, okay, this is potential harm. But the reality is it's just happening. And if you can change the way that you relate to the circumstance or the person, it has a profound effect on regulating your own system and keeping you in a state of rest and recovery. So I know on a couple of previous conversations we've had, you've talked a lot about the mind's impact on the body. Could you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So, like as I said before, the nervous system reacts to our thoughts and to our emotions immediately. So, the quality of your thoughts and your emotions will determine how your nervous system responds. And like what you were saying about, like the way that we deal with other people and our perception of that. It's funny because I just remember a conversation that I was having with my mom, because my mom has this idea sometimes, like, oh, that person is nasty and it's just bad and it's evil. And sometimes I'm like, well, but what if this person is just traumatized? What if this person is just responding through extreme fear. What if what you are calling evil is just trauma, is just a defense mechanism? I remember when I heard this in therapy, when I was studying hypnotherapy, and the concept that only hurt people hurt. I feel this is such a good perspective for us to have a bit more compassion, because once you are in that, then you don't take it personally anymore. You are going to look at the other person and go, oh, okay, it's not really about me, but this is the mental and emotional state where this person is. And another important thing, that state is not the personality, because I feel often we judge people as if the trauma was part of their character, and it isn't. And I feel like when we start understanding this and changing this, that's where the real change happens. Because in terms of nervous system, and I've seen other nervous system professionals sometimes, and they say, oh, you can heal everything with breath work. And I say no, because breath work is amazing and I completely recommend. And yes, it's going to be super helpful to activate your parasympathetic nervous system and help you navigate all that. But if you do not change your mind and how you think, you can do as much breath work as you like, but you are going to go back into the same thought patterns that are creating the emotions that are triggering the nervous system. So it's very important that we shift our perspective and understand that many times, we get upset with people, but, this is more about us and our bruised ego than it's about the other person.
Yeah, 1,000%. I've learned, and a lot of this is like, whether it's true, whether it's not, it really comes down to, is it a good framework for you to live a better, more healthy, expansive life? And one of the things that I've really bought into for myself is that life presents us with people and circumstances to show us where we're not free. And when you play the game that way, you see and recognize, I'm being triggered by this person, or I'm being triggered by this circumstance. And it shifts it from being about them, where we might judge and label and shame the person for acting the way they are, and really seeing it as a mirror for how it's showing me every way in which I'm stuck, because it really should have no effect on me. And it's helped me to sit back and sit with different, circumstances, different things that have been happening, and say, okay, what is it? Why do I feel the need to be triggered by this person's actions? What is it showing? What's it revealing about myself? And then most often I can sit with it and really allow it to resolve and say it has nothing to do with me. And then I can see different people's patterns, or the fact that maybe they did have trauma, oftentimes going all the way back to their childhood. And this is just a reaction it's really involuntary. It's such a deep rooted, psychological thing, where they have identified as a certain way of being. And then when when they enter a state of fear, they can often turn that into anger. But all they're doing is using their parasympathetic nervous system to try and survive and address fear, which oftentimes converts to anger. And it really helps you realize, like, the compassion that you can have for somebody going through something, and realize that they're just doing the best they can with the level of awareness they have. And it's really for us to appreciate, and with compassion, maybe having to set some boundaries, right? Because we have to protect ourselves, but still be ultimately compassionate and find love for that person, not anger, hate, and shame.
Yeah, absolutely. For the person and many times for ourselves as well. Because
Yeah.
it's not like when we are triggered, the tendency is to blame the other. Like we don't want to see it. We want to escape. We want to run away. So, like what you were describing earlier, to sit with that, the ability to sit with that requires a bit of training, because often what we do is to find distractions. And sometimes we just need to recognize our wound and where it's hurting, and like learn how to self-soothe and to reframe that story, but to have compassion for ourselves as well, because we sometimes we can do that. Oh, that person is hurt, but like I'm fine. I have nothing to do with it. So it's, yeah, looking within is not an easy game.
No, it's certainly not, but it is certainly a helpful framework to use so that you're not triggering yourself more than you need to, already. Um,
Yeah.
in part of the work that I've been doing over the past year, I've come to understand this idea that we all create these lies within our own mind. And it comes back to something we learned throughout our childhood. And then we take on different identities. And all of these different identities, it can be being a great son or daughter, being a good father, being a great spouse, being a boss, being an athlete, all of these carry different expectations. And then we feel the pressure of those identities to act a certain way to live up to, external um, expectations. And our mind then, in conjunction with the ego, will wrap onto that identity or those identities, and then it will look for all the evidence it can find to prove and then create a strategy for making sure that that identity never dies. And that's how people get stuck in these patterns, because the ego in fight or flight is working to keep ourselves alive, but they're also working to keep those identities alive. And then we create a strategy for keeping that identity alive, and that life becomes very exhausting, and we get kind of trapped. And that's where these different patterns of the way we think, the way we feel, create these patterns, and the patterns create very predictable outcomes. I want to recall a conversation you and I had a few months ago, and I believe, and help me get this story right, you used to watch your grandmother, I believe, and your grandmother from time to time would have seizures, but she didn't want to get fixed because when she had them, the family came around. Do you recall that story?
Yeah,
Could you
absolutely.
share that? I think that's such a fascinating, it's beautiful. There's a bit of sadness, but it also really helps people understand that, you know, even though she could have gotten better, she enjoyed the fact that it triggered the family coming around, and she would rather stay in that state and have the family come around, right, than to cure it.
So she was benefit. So, like, but although she said that to me, she wasn't exactly aware of it. And when she said that to me, I was 11 years old. But I remember something clicked in me, and I was like, oh, so somehow she benefits from it, right? And that's what we call the secondary gain of disease. It's when the very thing that you want to heal is serving a purpose and it's serving you. And it can show up in so many different ways. So it's very common, for example, like to see children who start having, mysterious fever. Then they go to the doctor, there is nothing wrong with them. But then when you investigate, it's often children who are being bullied at school, so the body is creating that as a defense. Or people, for example, if they are scared of a promotion that can happen, right? And you start to feel suddenly mysterious pain or something because you're unconsciously you are afraid to move forward, so it serves you somehow, right? I've seen that with like people going through chronic diseases for a very long time, that like it becomes indeed part of their identity. And for some people, I know it's a hard thing to listen, but for some people it serves them to be in a victim state. Obviously people are not to blame because all of this is happening outside of their awareness. It's not that they are consciously choosing to do that, but it's rather an unconscious response. And it's great that we are actually talking about this, because we were talking about like how we can scale our business, how we can grow and expand. And sometimes the way for that is to slow down. And that is so true, because if we want to expand, but the nervous system perceives that as a threat, you are going to procrastinate, sabotage, or sometimes even get ill and don't understand why, because actually you are in a state of fear. And often those are our blind spots. We don't even realize that we are going through it.
So that this is such a fascinating topic, is the idea of scaling by slowing down. And I know for me, carrying around identities that I had created from different things in my childhood, where I wanted to be the perfect son. I never wanted to be the reason my mom ever experienced pain. I then wanted to be the perfect dad, the perfect husband, the perfect boss. And I felt like there was all this pressure on me to perform. And it had me really in this state of needing to control everything. And I felt this really tight grip, on the steering wheel of life, trying to control everything and trying to show I could somehow do everything, and working really hard to be perfect, or as perfect as I could. And it wasn't until recently that I realized striving to be perfect is insane. We're human. Like, we should open up, create space, and allow for the human side that is inevitably going to uh, make mistakes. It's inevitably going to do things that we're not so proud of. But that helps us, by being a little more vulnerable, hold space for other people and let them know it's okay to not be perfect. And, in looking back, I realized I was putting a lot of pressure on those people around me to also be perfect, which is when you're just signaling they're not okay exactly the way they are, but we're all okay. There's nothing wrong with any of us. Um, we're all human, and we're all doing the best that we can with the level of awareness we have. But that was a big learning for me, was just to slow down, accept the fact that I'm human, embrace all parts of myself. And it really started leading me back to my true self, which is a place of love, happiness, and those things before success. And it's really made life significantly easier. But let's touch on, from your perspective, the idea and the concept of being able to slow down to scale. What does that mean to you, and how does that relate to the nervous system?
I feel like what that means to me is to first, it's not necessarily slowing down, but it's like recognizing your capacity. And for example, like for me on a personal level, I also identify, with being a perfectionist and hyper independent. I left home, I was only 18 years old, and started working since I was 22 and never stopped, and everything. But at certain point when I was still having a job but trying to grow a business, and I thought that I could do everything, why not? I've always handled everything. But eventually, I had burnout because the system was just collapsing and I was in fear. And that's the thing, you don't realize when you are in it. It took me
No.
time to realize I had anxiety, that I was in fear, and then you start procrastinating and you don't understand why. You go like, well, I have always been a high achiever. I have always been super productive. What is going on? And you don't even understand. So sometimes we need to realize, okay, is this how does it feel? Because obviously we want to grow. If you ask any person, do you want to grow your business? Do you want to make more money? The answer is always yes, but are you ready for it? And it's so interesting. I don't know if you've seen this before, but the statistics on lottery, people who win the lottery, do you know that? But 70% of people who win the lottery lose everything. I remember when
Yes.
I saw that, I was like, wow, this is like how? How did
Right.
they manage to do that? But obviously, if your threshold, if what you allow yourself to receive is up to a certain amount, when you receive more, your system, your mindset, your subconscious mind is just not ready for it. And you are going to find ways to sabotage. So it's often, it's not like when we say, slow down, we are not saying to people to necessarily work less, but it's like, how does it feel when you feel, because it could sometimes could be fear of more responsibility, could be fear of overwhelm, but like there are so many fears that could be running the show. And I feel like this is slow down sometimes is to pause and assess, how am I excited about it, or am I stressed about it?
Right. Well, I think so many of us, especially I would speak for the those living in the U.S. and in the Western world, that there's this sense of if I'm busy, then I'm being productive. But busy doesn't equal, productivity. I've looked at my own calendar in the last year and realized so many things I was just doing because they were in front of me. I was never taking the time to say, is this a real high return item? Can I sit with this a little longer? And it was amazing. I started saying no to about 70% of the things I was being asked to do, and thinking I needed to do to be busy, which I somehow was equating to success. And just simply by realizing the key to really growing wealth is finding out where can you add the most value? What kind of mastery can you deliver, right? What kind of mastery can you undertake so that you become a master of delivering the highest level of value and say no to almost everything else? And there's so many people throughout history that were that way. And I remember doing a rather deep dive on Einstein and realizing so many times he would take 2-3 months to respond to a letter, to come up with 2 or 3 sentences that was the perfect way to capture language to express himself and then send that. But he was so intentional about the way he wanted to communicate to say just the right thing. He wasn't responding. I couldn't imagine him in today's world of texting and emailing and Instagramming and everything else. But it really taught me a lesson that you can focus on really high value things, do far less, but have much greater impact, and get rid of the things that aren't serving you. And in that way, it really is creating the space that allows you to grow into it. As you said, find the things that make you excited, right? Notice in your body where you feel excited to do what you get to do. So you're choosing to do it, not living in this world of I have to do everything, and you're never getting through your to-do list, in any given day.
Yeah, but it's like the mind can be so sneaky that, even because, yeah, absolutely, I 100% agree with you that prioritizing the things that actually move the needle and doing less is much better. You feel more spacious, you have more space for creativity, but often we don't do it. And it's interesting because, sometimes when we think about procrastination, we can think about the classic behaviors of avoiding it. So some people will go and, oh no, I'll do the laundry, I'll call someone or whatever. But what you said before about being busy, people don't realize, but sometimes being too busy can be a form of procrastination,
Right,
because, like perhaps it's just two actions on a day that will move the needle, but then you have like all that to-do list that you believe that you have to do, and then you go, no, but I am busy. So you are tricking yourself into, no, but I am doing it. Like
right.
it's not that I'm wasting time on social media, or anything. I'm working, I am doing it. But sometimes this is also procrastinating on the very things that will move things forward. And that's why
Yeah,
sometimes people fail. And I don't like this word because I feel that there is no failure, but just learning. But if things are not progressing the way that you want, we need to evaluate, okay, what is actually going on here. Sometimes it's strategy, yeah, there is that too. But often it's our inner dialogue. It's just this capacity that needs to feel more expansive before we move forward.
yeah. Yeah, I was listening to a gentleman speak last week, and he was talking about the idea, and it was about building wealth, and that those that build tremendous wealth operate on a strategy. They're not trying to tactically build their wealth, but the people who try and they do so much more but can't really grow their wealth are doing tactical things, trying to time markets and being very busy, doing a ton of different trades, basically throwing a lot of things against the wall and hoping something sticks and that they miraculously hit a home run because they've had 1,000 at bats. But I'm always drawn to Warren Buffett, who said if he was giving anybody investment advice, it would be that you only get a 20 punch card. You can only make 20 investments through your life. How much more intentional would you be? How much more research would you do so that the bet that you did place was going to be a relatively low risk but high strategic return? And it might happen slow, but it's going to happen. And then you can kind of double down. And that really hit me. One of the wealthiest people in the world would say only do 20 actions, and really go all in on those 20 investments rather than the 1,000 of at bats trying to hit one tactical home run. One of the things I would like to do is shift here for a second. But I'd like to remind the audience, if you have a question, please feel free to write it in the chat. We'd love to take your comments. I know a lot of people out there this topic of slowing down to scale is very intriguing, but also what is going on, in your body, and how can you move from a state of fight or flight to rest and recovery and spend more of your time there. But Marta, could we talk a little specifically about when people are feeling what's in their body, whether it's back pain, neck pain, elbow or joints? Those things tend to have specific signals that they're signaling to us. Could you touch on some of those things, and then how do you help people resolve those pains?
Yeah, so like with chronic pain, so like the pain science, what we know is that pain always have two components, a physical one and an emotional one. So of course, if there is an injury, then we have a physical component and we have an emotional one as well. But once the pain is chronic, and chronic means that you have been experiencing pain for over a year. That means that your body had all the time to heal, ligaments, tissues, everything. So once you are in a state of chronic pain, now we know that there is a strong psychological, emotional component, because the expectation of pain creates pain itself, right? And it's very interesting. But like for example, like people who are experiencing a lot of stress, if your emotional state is not well, people with anxiety, for example, like they tend to experience a lot more pain. But with that, like no one size fits all, because sometimes people just start to feel pain out of the blue. So we need to really look and investigate properly what is happening, because sometimes it could be just that you need a bit of stretching every day. If you are not exercising, if you are not moving your body often, if you start doing it, it could be the solution. But if you are exercising, if you stretch your body, if you are doing everything and the pain persists, sometimes it's a form of communication. I had a person recently who had 20 years of chronic pain. She had an accident over 10 years ago, and nothing was resolving her problem. And, pain would come and go. And then we were tracing, when she was having flares, and, her back would lock and she would go to hospital and everything. And we realized that every single time that was happening, it was when she was starting to date someone new. And then, oh, okay, what is going on here? And then when we were tracing, we're like, oh, okay, it goes to a father wound, that when her parents got divorced, then her dad started a relationship with a woman who was living in Japan, and he was going to Japan often. So he pretty much, wasn't around as much anymore. So she experienced a lot of abandonment, but she never like without investigating further, she wouldn't realize that. And it was so incredible because it was a case of 20 years of chronic pain, and then in 7 sessions, she's like, I'm 90% better. I'm not feeling it anymore. And we finished her treatment 4 months ago, and she messaged me a few days ago going, like, I'm really better. It hasn't returned, and I'm so grateful. So I believe that everything, no one size fits all, and we need to investigate. But sometimes as well, especially if you are growing a business, or doing something, sometimes the pain is there because it's trying to communicate something. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's trauma, or sometimes it's just a sign that this is not the path for you. If there is anguish, especially, sometimes that is a sign that is like, oh, maybe we're doing it out of logic, or you were doing it because you believe that if you do that, you are going to be successful or have more prestige, respect, whatever it is. But maybe this isn't the path that is actually aligned with your heart, with your soul. So there are a few routes there to investigate.
Yeah. And so how do you investigate, and how then, what is the process then for resolving and dissolving what it is that's causing that pain? So it's one thing to recognize, right? Like, this comes from my father, who is then dating a new lady in Japan, and I felt abandoned. But how does that person dissolve what is going on that then is leading to the pain?
Yeah, so I work in two ways. Like when I first start with someone, it's often talking therapy. So I need to understand, what is going on. So often with the right questions, you can elicit what is going on. And then is allowing space for people to process. And hypnosis can be very effective for you to do that. So hypnosis can be used for you to go back into your childhood and reframe, right? But here I have to say, like, I've been working with people for over 6 years, and often when we are talking about smaller traumas, that is okay, the person had, like, let's say, a normal family, like there was
Yeah.
loving, but also they have their issues because no one is enlightened, right? So those are easier to reframe. But some people had bigger traumas. Some people did have a childhood of abuse, emotional neglect, and sometimes those are a lot harder to reframe because sometimes it is what it is. And often when it gets to that, I lean into forgiveness. And we don't talk enough about forgiveness, but forgiveness is so important and it doesn't come easy. So sometimes I find myself educating people into forgiveness. So, forgiveness doesn't mean giving permission to the person to do it again. It's not condoning, it's not accepting, but forgiveness is just releasing the grudge, it's just releasing the pain. And yeah, and doesn't work when it's intellectual, because some people, they just say, oh yeah, of course I forgive, I don't think about it anymore, it's all fine. But emotionally it's still there. But forgiveness, when really comes from the heart, it's incredible, but it's life changing. Suddenly it's almost like, I like to describe this. It's like a cloudy day. The sunshine is always there. And the sunshine, in this case, in this metaphor, could be a representation of our love, our joy, the peace. But then the clouds are all these negative emotions and our traumas and everything. And once you clear that, naturally, the sun is always there. The love is always there. We all have that within.
Right. This, so one of the things that I did this year was a life experiment on taking on these big events, these big endurance events. And I recognized that throughout my life, I had been judging to the point that I hated these events, but I realized I had never tried one. So these would be like hiking 45 miles, um, doing a 30-hour hike, the equivalent of Mount Everest, and some big, like, physical challenges that I had made up my mind for 51 years that I hated doing these, but I realized I'd never tried it. And I said, not only am I going to try it, but I'm going to see if I can take every step joyfully and really be in the moment. And I was surprised how much I was able to do that. And I have a 50K race coming up in 2 weeks outside of Atlanta. And these are all things that I just never had any thought that I would never do them, but the thought of actually loving every step seems so far. And one of the things that I recognized in that was that you could go from hate, judgment to love and actually love taking every step. But I also recognized there were parts in my body that just simply weren't built. Like I had pain in my lower extremities, my calves, my Achilles tendon, just tightness showing up all throughout my body. And to get through something like 45 miles of hiking in the Grand Canyon, I was going to have to do something to resolve that. And 3 things that I did was the hypnosis, where I got a mantra that anytime I ran into a tightness while I was doing the hikes, I would simply release it and let it go. And then I went back in the jungle in Bali with a Hindu priest and some energy healers and a meditation guru. And the meditation guru taught me how to meditate, go into my body, and actually open my heart and let my heart smile. And from there, it cleared all of the chakras so the energy could flow freely through you. And anytime I felt any tightness, any pain, I would just go inside, open my heart, let it smile. And literally the pain would completely disappear. And by the time I finished hiking 29,000 feet of elevation, I had no soreness in my body, which was just unbelievable. And then the last thing that I took on was I was taught this tradition and ceremony from Native Hawaiians that do ho ponopono. And it's basically kind of an energetic forgiveness. But going back to something we talked about early on, where it's all about you, it's how you relate to that person. And anytime we're in a relationship and it goes like, I love you, blank. I'm so sorry for the part of me that is you that I've neglected. Please forgive me and thank you. And if you say that in an energetic sense to whomever it is that you're struggling with, but you realize that they are mirroring back some part of you that is also stuck, just doing that before you go to bed, it's been amazing to see how much that has unwound and given forgiveness. And it's made me feel 1,000% more free. Those aches, those pains, those tightness have all gone away. And it's allowed me to free myself significantly. So those are the 3 different things that I had to learn to be able to get through these physical exercises and be able to endure 20 hours, 30 hours of straight hiking.
Amazing. And how simple is that? That's why I keep saying to people, it's simpler than you think. We are complicating healing. It's not that difficult, but doesn't come very easy, it's a bit of it's understanding. But I love what you shared about you consciously releasing the tension whenever you were experiencing that pain, which was the first thing that out of the 3 things, was the first one that you shared. This is so important because when we think about pain, any pain or any disease, like you could be experiencing something in your stomach, could be gastritis, could be whatever. It's always a contraction, because whenever we experience challenging emotions, anger, sadness, fear, we tense. There is a contraction. And if we are doing that often, then there is the accumulation there. And this is what is causing pain. This is what is causing the problem. So whenever you consciously choose to open up, to breathe into it, almost as if you were finding more space within your molecules, it's incredible how the body responds. And it's incredible how you can easily find relief. Like if I have a headache, that's pretty much all that I do, and it's gone. I very rarely take painkillers these days.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, releasing that tension and just giving yourself, the space to let energy flow through you is it's remarkable. And not only does it let go of the tension, that contraction, but it really does allow energy to flow through you, which gives you a surge of energy. We often think of energy being food and other things so that we have the physical energy. But how many times have we, fallen in love or something else happens and you just have this unbelievable energy to do so much more? And that simple meditation of opening my heart and letting it smile, it was like an instant B12 shot anytime I needed it, on the hill, to find and tap into more energy than I ever knew I had access to. And it had nothing to do with food or diet or that kind of energy.
Amazing.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I do want to remind people, if you have questions, I love your comments, David. But if anybody has questions for Marta, this is a great time to take advantage of her expertise and her time with us today. We've got about 7 more minutes, so if you have a question, please throw it in the chat. Marta, what else could you tell us about different things that we might be feeling? I know a lot of people who struggle with back pain, and oftentimes whenever I'm talking to them, it's so clear that they are just carrying the weight of so many different people and expectations, and it's showing up and manifesting in back pain. Are there things like that, or other, chronic pain that might just be showing up for some of the people in the audience that they could find a way to identify? Do you have any tips and tricks that they could use when they leave this call to try and resolve or dissolve any of those things that they might be struggling with?
Like on a psychological level, sometimes we need a bit of therapy to do that, because as I was saying before, we have our blind spots and it can be a bit tricky, to actually get to the root cause. But for example, just by relaxing, and that's when the somatic practices are so helpful. And those are things that you can do alone, you can do at home, and they are already very helpful for you to find release on your own. So if you have like a really heavy day, you're feeling stressed, like, like shaking, uh, like shaking all of your body, it's something very good. So the box breathing that we did in the beginning of this conversation today, this is another tool that you can use. Or sometimes just breathing like very deeply and slowly. Sometimes when you make the exhales lower than the inhale, this is also activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So all of those things help to soothe pain and symptoms. And when one tip that I have that I find it very important is the hypervigilance that we have sometimes when we are experiencing chronic symptoms or chronic pain, because it gets so frustrating sometimes. You're like, oh gosh, these again, and we go a lot into the fixing mode. I need to resolve this, I want to get rid of it. So instead of going into the getting rid of it, if you just look at it as communication from your body, and if you just welcome that with love and compassion, and do that exercise of breathing into it and opening up and allowing, that tension to just expand, because people perceive pain in different ways. Some people perceive it as kind of like a stabbing sensation, other people perceive as a burning sensation. So pain comes in very different ways, but all of that is tension. And opening up, you can already find some relief. And often that is enough, but sometimes when it's not, then it's because there are those subconscious blind spots that maybe sometimes it can be a bit tricky to identify those on ourselves. And that's when I go, yeah, we all need a little bit of therapy from time to time.
For sure.
But it's incredibly fast, like with chronic pain, for example, like 6 to 8 sessions, I've seen people having amazing results.
That's amazing. I think too, this idea of suffering. I mean, so many people are suffering. And one of the beautiful things that I've recognized about suffering is suffering itself is very real, but what we're suffering from is typically an illusion. And usually suffering is that you don't like the way reality is and you wish that it were different, but it can't be any different than exactly the way it is. So if you just come back, and I think, box breathing is a great way to get centered on reality is exactly the way it is. You may not like it, but until you acknowledge it and realize it is exactly the way it is right now, and it couldn't be any other way because it isn't, and sit with that, now you can then from that place start to change the way you're thinking, change the way you're feeling, and start to change some of your habits and patterns. And your reality will change, but it can only change from the present. And so many people get this distance where their wished reality was different. They're out into the future, wishing the future could change and trying to change it from a place that's not the present. And that is where suffering is created. So I think, for anybody listening, the more you can become okay with and understand the present is exactly the way it is, fall in love with that, recognize it. You may not like it, you may want it to be different, but recognize that it is exactly the way it is. Sit with that for a minute until you really embrace that. And then from there, you can change the way you think, the way you interpret, the way you relate to it, which will change the way you feel about it and allow you to then start to change your future, but do so from the present.
Yeah, and I would add to that because, yeah, reality is what is, but it's also how we perceive it,
Yeah.
right? Because it's where you put the focus of your attention. Because, for example, like some people might be like, these days I had a conversation with a friend and she seems very upset about all the political issues in Brazil right now. Uh, that involves Donald Trump, for example, like, and
Yeah.
people get so angry about those things. And yeah, like this is happening, it's undeniable. But also, like, like because she was feeling very helpless about the world, she was like, you see all those wars and people just, see Israel and Palestine and so many people dying, and often we can become hopeless about all that. But I said to her, I was like, well, there is that for sure, and that affects me too. But also, let's find the silver lining, yeah, because at the same time, look at those conversations that we are having. Like how many people in the world right now are going through this awakening process? How many people are actually creating businesses that are bringing amazing solutions to humanity? So there are also very positive things going on. For example, like now, look at how easy it is to travel, all the facilities that we enjoy. Look at how beautiful it is. We are having this conversation. You are in the US, I'm in Brazil at the moment, and we are here because of technology. So there are always positive things going on. And
Right.
there are always negative things. So, like choosing the perspective, the angle, the lenses that you want to wear, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes is what you said, is a matter of acceptance, and it's a beautiful place to be. But sometimes you just need different glasses, we just need different lenses.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that changes everything, right? When you just choose to look at something different, everything changes. Yeah. So, Marta, I can only imagine how many questions people have, maybe specific to their own life, their own body. For those listening in, how could they get a hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn, so they can find me there, find my profile there. So if they want to book a call, there's a link there to book a call. It's absolutely free to do that. On those calls, often that's what we do. I call the root cause call, where we start to explore some possible root causes, and people often walk away with some insights and a little practice for them to do. And sometimes it's a way to explore if they want to go deeper and work together. But nevertheless, it's always a great way to walk away at least with some insights in relation to what they have. So if you are going through chronic pain or like symptoms that persist, especially those when you've been to the doctor and they don't find anything and it's not healing, if you're doing everything right in terms of diet and everything and it's not healing, that's often when you need to look into the mind body connection and see what's underneath.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of people have very positive outcomes waiting for them after those calls. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your beautiful insights. It's been an absolute pleasure. And, I'm just very grateful that you took the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here, and it's always so nice to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We have another episode coming up on September 2nd with Shay Davis. And I just got 2 other confirmations. Joe Pine, the author of The Experience Economy, who's releasing a new book called The Transformation Economy, will be joining us in the coming weeks, as well as Chris Houth, who has been my trainer and coach for these endurance events, but he also is the coach for people like Rich Roll and other like really incredible athletes. And he's going to get on and talk about the idea of doing big things, doing hard things, and how that can lead to a much more expansive life. So some great episodes forthcoming. This one has been exceptional. Marta, thank you again. And thank you for everyone for tuning in.
Thanks for watching an Expansive Life Conversation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next week.